Welcome back to Practical Project Management Podcast. Today is PPM Podcast episode 4 with Jesse Fewell. I really enjoyed speaking with Jesse. He was actually recommended to me by episode 3's guest, Cindy Snyder, Dionisio, who said that I had to interview Jesse Fewell and talk with him about Agile and its intersection with project management. Jesse Fewell is an award-winning author, coach, and trainer who helps senior leaders from Boston to Beijing transform their organizations to achieve more innovation, collaboration, and business agility. A management pioneer, he founded and grew the original Agile Community of Practice within the Project Management Institute. He served on leadership subcommittees for the Scrum Alliance and written publications reaching over 500,000 readers in 11 languages. He's also the author of a book that was released in 2020, Untapped Agility, 7 Leadership Moves to Transform Your Transformation. I hope you enjoy episode 4 as much as I did. So here's Jesse Fewell.
What's the use of knowing true north?
But I just wanted to ask you which way I ought to go.
You get so caught up in restoring the galaxy to its rightful state.
I understand you're trying. You may be trying too hard and you're not trying hard enough.
Always with you. Cannot be done.
Confront the problem. Fight it. Win.
Whatever it is we look forward to.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride.
Practical Project Management Podcast.
Well, Jesse, thank you for agreeing to join me today in this session of our podcast. I've been so excited to talk to you. My last session was with Cindy, and she spoke so highly of you, and also looking at just the expertise that you have, your topics, what I think we'll be talking about today really resonates with me. I'm also really excited about your upcoming book because I think what I read in your bio that I really connected on was that in your coaching leaders and practitioners, really leadership is kind of my theme for 2021. It seems like everything we talk about, we come back around to leadership, no matter where the topic begins, right?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I'm super excited to be here, super excited to talk shop, and ready to kind of see what comes up, because I know that you're a student of a lot of trends. So yeah, let's go.
Okay. Well, I think we need to start with, because you and I haven't had a lot of discussion about background, and I'm looking at everything you're doing now, but tell me about your journey of how you got to here. Where starting as a math student?
Oh my goodness, you went way back. Okay.
Yeah, way back.
Yeah. So growing up, my favorite movie as a kid was The Day the Earth Stood Still, because in that movie, the aliens froze the earth and all of its people from doing bad stuff. And so here comes the good looking alien guy. He's walking around and he's like, "Take me to your leader, little boy." And the little boy said, "Well, I don't know the leader." "Well, who's the smartest man in the world?" And the little boy said, "Well, the smartest man I know is the math professor." And so he goes and he takes the guy over to walks the alien over to the math professor, who's already solving equations on the board. And of course, the alien totally understands the Greek alphabet that he was using and goes and helps him solve the equations. And I'm like, you know what? That's me. I want to be a math professor so I can solve equations with aliens. And that's what I studied in college. I studied math until a friend of mine who's like, "So that's great, but don't you want a job after you graduate? You should check out computers." So that's how I ended up from like dreaming from being a math professor, hanging out with aliens, to end up being a computer programmer. And right when the object-oriented programming thing was big, there was we had just finished moving past the structured programming debate and getting objects and making them real and all of that. And that's when I got exposed to a methodical approach to software and building software from the perspective of the customer and the concepts around that. And I did that for about a solid 15 years. But eventually I came to the conviction that I could be the greatest engineer in the world and our projects are still going to fail because of leadership issues. I'm tired of it. So you know what I'm going to do? You know what? I'm going to go be a project manager. I'm going to go get a PMP. I'm going to go get a fancy title. And then people are going to listen to me and stop screwing everything up. So I did. I went and I got that PMP and I got that fancy title. And you know what I noticed? People still didn't listen to me. So that was my journey from engineer to project manager. And along that journey, I had been dabbling with what were called lightweight methods along the way, first as an engineer and then as a project manager. And eventually started getting a little bit more serious into it when a little bit after the Agile word was officially coined. Can't believe it's 20 years ago. 20 years ago this month, the Agile movement was officially born. And then that really turned into a career. And so, like, honestly, for the last, I'm going to say for the last 15 years, I've been a full-time Agile consultant of some flavor, whether it's engineering or scrumming or coaching or whatever it is. And over the course of that, I've come to some convictions about what makes organizations successful on their journey to get better and what makes them a little bit frustrated and take longer with more pain. And that kind of inspired the book.
Well, that sounds amazing. I love the idea of your first career was going to be working with the aliens, and then you realized that wasn't a very good economic plan. And we haven't talked, but I had kind of a similar journey. I didn't have a very good economic plan because I trained to be a school teacher. So after 10 years of doing that, interestingly enough, I became a programmer like you. And it was what I thought my career was going to be, programming, writing code. And we must have kind of in the same time frame, I really understood. I was the kid that liked geometry better than algebra, the weird kid, because I like to classify and group things. And that made a lot of sense to me. And the reason I mention this is because I was like you, I was programming, and I remember being hauled to a meeting. I wasn't a programmer very long before I started getting hauled to all these meetings because I had an opinion about everything, right? And
I couldn't tell.
We go to this meeting with this client and we show them what we built based on what I thought were the specs, right? And my boss is there and the customer is saying, no, it needs this and it needs that. And, I just a lowly programmer still had a pretty good sense that this project was way underfunded. And we got in the car and I said, well, that's entirely unreasonable and out of scope, right? And they didn't say anything. My boss and a peer in another department that was sitting up front didn't say anything. And I said, right? I mean, we do have a scope of work, right? This is written down somewhere. Still nothing. And eventually one of my peers in the back seat goes, drop it. And kind of like you, I decided that we better do but I didn't know, because I'd been a school teacher. I didn't know PMP. I didn't know PMI. I just was like, somebody better take control of this because this is a mess.
This place needs a big dose of common sense.
That's right. We got to write things down and do what's written. So I have to confess too, because I want to talk about untapped agility with you, but I want you to set me straight. Tell me I'm either okay or not okay.
Uh-oh.
Uh-huh. Because the common sense thing that we just talked about, so 20 years of Agile. And I had worked with a lot of customers that, they embraced a methodology. And then that's like every other word out of their mouth. So it's like rup, 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 rup. And
Or
then
CMMI.
yeah.
Right.
And so I was like, can we, guys, we're trying to get some work done here. This is what I need to know. And if you couldn't talk within the methodology, they just looked at you like you were an alien from outer space. So with the Agile movement, I was like, yeah, fine. I get that. That's kind of cool. And I see times when even in what we're doing, we're technically, using an Agile or adaptive approach in this. But I could not get that customer. They're like, no. When I wanted to interview someone, because in my head is, I just had my MCSD at the time, extensibility, scalability, right? I'm going, I got to kind of understand the domain, guys, so that I know it can go like this when you do that to me. And they were like, nope. This is what we're building right here. And we're only going to do this part. And so I kind of went, I don't really have much use for these Agile people.
Interesting.
Even though the products that we delivered, we went through many delivery cycles where we did a lot of adaptive or iterative work because the specs were so bad.
Yeah. So you raise a really common question. It's a good one because it deals with, I think, the misunderstanding about adapting to change versus blindly following a plan as two complete extreme opposites. And what I've come to the observation, I've noticed that when it comes to this Agile business, when it comes to trying to be more Agile, too many people throw the baby out with the bathwater. That the official Declaration of Agility, the manifesto for product development, says that we believe that adapting to change is more valuable than blindly following a plan. That does not mean that we stop planning altogether all the time forever. Right. Likewise, there's another one that says that we believe that at the end of the day, a working product is more valuable than the documents that describe the product.
Amen.
Okay, that's true. That's true. It's common sense. But that does not mean we stop writing stuff down.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
you gotta have something written.
Yeah. And so there is this, I think, knee-jerk reaction, which is in order to be liberated from the oppression of doing too much of one thing, I have to go all the way to the extreme of doing none of it at all. And that's really where a lot of the fervor and the dogma and all of the religious stuff about this Agile thing, it really is people feeling oppressed at the office. People feeling oppressed by bureaucracy processes that don't make any sense. And so we're going to rise up and be empowered teams, and people feeling oppressed by firm fixed contracts that don't make any sense. And so we're going to rise up and do everything iteratively and incrementally, and we're going to rise up and not do documents anymore. And I have to just hold on, ladies and gentlemen, hold on. It's more about balance. It's about finding the sweet spot of doing things that are going to add value at the right time, at the right degree.
Okay, so it sounds like I can get into your camp. It sounds like we're really on the same page. It was the extremists that I had such a hard time with that I felt like I had to run to the other side to balance them, or we were all going to tip over, follow this way. So tell me what inspired you, if you don't mind, tell me what inspired you to write Untapped Agility.
So as I was moving into this Agile conversation, what I noticed happening was I started having a feeling of deja vu. Remember the story where I could be the greatest engineer in the world and this is all still going to fail because of leadership issues? Well, I started having this feeling of deja vu, which could be summarized by I could be the greatest Agilist in the world and we're still going to fail because of leadership issues. And I found that a lot of the issues that I was running into, I now was able to understand with a different perspective. Because by now, 20 years later, I had already run a few startups into the ground myself. How about that? I had already been on the winning side of a few big projects. I had been engaged in a community of diverse opinions and perspectives. And so now I was able to look at the whole leadership conversation with a little bit of empathy. And I think a lot of professionals lose sight that leaders are people too. And it can suck to be the center of everybody's attention and criticism and expectation. And that can be a lot of pressure. I'm talking to a CTO right now who's very concerned about making the right move after getting a $150 million round of investment. And I've been involved in a number of ventures. I've held the CTO hat for a hot minute or two, but to say that I've been in his shoes would be a stretch. So I need to start exhibiting a little bit of empathy and appreciation for what leaders struggle with and face. And that really was me wanting to inject a little bit of perspective into this question about going on an agile journey of faster delivery, higher productivity, better quality, higher morale, clear visibility on work in progress, all of those organizational outcomes that agility promises. It can be confusing. It can be bumpy. And this is what I was running into over and over and over again as maybe a project practitioner, as a product practitioner, a technologist who's wanting to help people be successful. It turns out that particularly when it comes to change initiatives, leadership is hard. And I wanted to share that message with a broad audience in a way that I felt like hadn't been shared well enough, particularly in our community.
Interesting. That's talk about balance. That's balance to some of the things that I've been saying lately about leaders. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you approach that, or give us a little insight or a little preview into your book?
Absolutely. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. It's the green light. Get ready, buckle up, here it comes. So every change initiative, every kind of journey that you're going on, there's really three aspects to it. But usually what we get frustrated about, we're frustrated with the pain. We're frustrated by some kind of barrier. So for example, I don't have enough buy-in. We don't have enough support for this change initiative. Or another one might be, we rolled out all of these cool practices and processes, but nobody's doing them right. They're all wrong. Well, that's the barrier. That's the current place where you are in your journey. And you know what? The only reason you're facing a barrier is because you've already achieved a boost to get there in the first place. The fact that you don't have enough buy-in means you've already done a really good job of some unilateral initiative. You started this conversation. You got the ball rolling, and good job. Feel good about that. You went on record. You took a risk. That's a good thing. Now you've hit a barrier where you really have only gone as far as you can just on your own, and now you need a few other people to join in. Likewise, you can complain about practices being done poorly and processes being done poorly because they've been installed. Well done. Great job. You just injected industry best practice into your environment, but you've only gone so far because you're realizing that theory and practice, expectation and reality don't always align all the time. So now it's time to start looking at the rebound. So you got a boost that got you to a barrier, and the rebound, it turns out, is to lean against the logic that got you where you are. So when it comes to getting more buy-in, it might be time to let go of your initiative and your drive. Stop explaining and start listening. Stop selling and start aligning. That'll get more people interested in what you have to say, and then you'll have a rebound forward. Likewise with practices, in order to move forward, you need to lean against the correctness of that textbook industry best practice and start looking at maybe throwing the textbook away and adapting the practice, tailoring it, refining it, and adapting it to your current situation. And then you'll rebound into more momentum. So that's the fundamental pattern, which is, well, there's a boost. There's always a positive boost. There's always something to be proud of that's gotten you initial momentum in your initiative, your change, your journey. But you're running into a painful barrier because congratulations, you made progress. And now we need to rebound past that barrier, the boost, the barrier, and the rebound. What got you here won't get you there. That's another book, but that's the pattern and that's the story.
Interesting. So are we able to, I guess what I'm curious about, does your book offer, I think you indicated that there might be suggestions for us to look at things in a different way. Like maybe do you offer key reasons for failure, or, you did this, but you should have done this?
So there's right there. It's not you should have.
Okay.
And I think that's a really important point to make for a lot of leaders, a lot of influencers and practitioners, that if I'm running into anything bad, it's because I did something wrong. And that is just not true. In fact, the opposite is true. The reason you're running into anything bad is because you're probably doing something right. And you're revealing a lot of bleh. You're revealing a lot of ick. You're revealing the next stage of progress and the next stage of improvement, which is you solve one problem and it now reveals the next problem. So this actually came up in a recent presentation I did on the 20th anniversary of agility. And one of the things that I think came up there's about 6 different movements that you can call under the Agile umbrella. The first one was around Agile project management. We're gonna overcome project bureaucracy, and then came overcoming technology silos. It's not just about computer programmers. It's actually about testers as well. And it's also about those operations people. And that's where DevOps came into play. And then it turns out it's not just for that. It's also about large scale programs that involve both software and hardware and business side.
Right.
And so now we're starting to talk about large scale agility and scaled agile and the SAFe framework and so on and so on. And then it turned out it's not just about that. It's also about organizational culture. And now we got to overcome like traditional culture and leadership styles and start looking at maybe a postmodern mindset about Zappos that adopted holacracy, for example, or the spiral dynamics model that Frederick Laloux popularized in his book Reinventing Organizations, where we need to start exploring self-organization as a cultural value. And so what it revealed is that all of these were problems that we just couldn't conceive of when the Agile conversation first started, because we hadn't gotten there yet. So you're only going to solve the 4th problem after you've solved the 3rd problem, after you've solved the 2nd problem, after the 1st problem. So it's not, the fact that you're running into something problematic and bad does not mean that there was something I should have done differently in the past necessarily.
Okay. Well, I mean, I appreciate that, because I agree with you that leadership, there's no specific playbook for leadership. And what you're talking about in your role as a leader is how to respond when you've moved forward. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that you've made progress, so now you have a new set of problems,
Yeah.
and you'll respond to those too.
And it's also within the frame of empathy and humanity, which is to say, stop blaming leaders for not getting it, not having a clue, and because you haven't walked a mile in their shoes.
Right.
And instead, let's reframe this as a journey. Let's re-examine this and as a place where we learn as we go, we solve problems as we go along. I think the temptation, particularly for project professionals and also for engineers and technologists, is that the people that are in positions of official authority, we tend to oversimplify, I think, the people that serve in those roles. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is because a lot of people in those roles tend to have good days and bad days. They tend to be good at their jobs sometimes, and some people tend to be not good at their jobs, just like anybody else. The difference is that when you're in a leadership role, when you're good at your job, it has a ripple effect. And when you're bad at your job, it has a ripple effect as well. So wouldn't it be great if we could approach those colleagues with a positive message instead of, you don't get it, you're clueless, you suck, it's all your fault. Now, maybe you're not saying those things out loud, but what if instead we were to say, so for example, with that scope creep situation, I get it. We're under a lot of pressure. This is a huge customer. And if we just say no to this customer and they cancel the contract, that's about 24 jobs that we just lost. I get it. Now, with that said, how do we do this without leaving a trail of dead bodies behind us? So it's that yes and kind of mindset.
Right. Do you have examples, or is there anyone that you've worked with recently in recent years that you think is really skilled at that? Like, that their teams really empathize with them as a leader because of the way the leader interacts with the team, and that the leader themselves is more likely to gain empathy or understanding from their teams in the way that they manage or the way they lead.
Yeah, there's one person in particular, and I highlight him in the book, and his name is Howard Sublett. He's the chief executive at the Scrum Alliance, and he's somebody I consider to be a friend. And the reason his story is interesting is because if you haven't been following the Scrum Alliance, they're the largest trade association in the world dedicated to this Agile stuff, with well over 1 million constituents. And it's an organization it had its share of ups and downs and internal issues and changes in leadership. And so it left a lot of the members and a lot of the practitioners a little bit skeptical until Howard came in. And immediately there was a different vibe when he took the role about 2 years ago. Because first of all, he had credibility as being somebody that was known as one of us. So there you go. Leaders, if you want to build some credibility, find a way to connect with people at their level. Yeah, you know what? I was an engineer for 15 years and I realized I was only mediocre at it. That's why I moved into project manager, where I was even worse at that. and so you can find a way to build credibility. People look at you as someone who has walked in their shoes at least a little bit. And that was Howard. But the other thing that was interesting is that he built credibility by sharing his role immediately as the chief product owner for the Scrum Alliance. He realized, I need a chief Scrum Master to help me do this. And so he shared the CEO role with a chief Scrum Master for 2 years. It was a 2-year experiment that ended up with huge organizational change and improvements. People were reallocated into true cross-functional product teams. There was a set of cultural values that were discussed and shared. a lot of things. And he also, the third thing that Howard brought is he brought an inspiring vision that resonated with people about, we believe that as a nonprofit association, the Scrum Alliance can help bring a workplace to everyone that is joyful, prosperous, and sustainable. Everyone's like, yeah, I want some of that. That sounds awesome. So he's an example of somebody who walked the walk that other people have walked, who was willing to share his power, his status, and as someone who's able to tell a story that's inspiring and meaningful to people. So those are three attributes that I think that has really contributed to the absolute turnaround that he's been able to helm over the last 2 years.
That's incredible. That's a great story. It made me remember, some days are harder as a leader and you've got a lot of things coming at you. But so early on in my pre-graduate career working in the university cafeteria, because I've always found stories about leadership very interesting, inspiring, because from my perspective, you're just one person and you can't move very much by yourself. But if you can inspire and motivate other people, then that huge boulder is simple because the team comes aboard and you get from A to B, right? With everybody pushing the boulder in the same direction. And so just little experiments early on when I was a shift manager. And being a shift manager in the cafeteria, especially at night, is a little bit of a challenge because nobody wants to work at night and you've got to staff. You're responsible to staff the line, right? And so you've got to have the food runners, you've got to have the people serving on the steam tables, you got to have the gal in, the salad room, you got to have all that. And so it was really important to me to make sure people wanted to be on my team. So I thought, how can I be liked, right? How can I get people to want to sign up for my shifts? So what I used to do is I would go out. I just, kind of analyzed, well, what do I have? I can't give them more money and I can't be anything but me. So what I do is during the rush, right, where it's a lot of fast-paced movement, the steam tables are hot, they're never pleasant. So what I used to do would be to go relieve someone for a 5-minute break. And I would just go up to the steam table, I'd tap them on the shoulder and say, go get a drink and cool off. And then I would just literally, after they came back, I'd go down and go down and go down. And people told me that was the thing that they appreciated so much, that I actually cared how hard their job was and that they wanted to work on my shift. And I was like, I'm 20 at the time. And I'm like, this is genius. Somehow I've got to take this into the future with me. So I really agree, or that resonates with me, that you bring other people in or you get empathy. Because do you think though that the lack of empathy with leadership is really a cultural problem?
I think it's more of a human problem. I think
Okay.
that I think as humans, and I've been doing a lot of reading lately on spirituality and Christian mysticism. And I think one of the things that's buried in our brains, evolutionary brains, is the distance from me to the other. And that distance from me to the other, I mean, if you think back, and like, we're all cavemen and we're all fighting over food. So either I get food or you get food. And so I'm not going to trust the other. I'm not going to look at their life because I've got to fight for my own survival. Well, fast forward bazillion years to today, and it's still the same thing, isn't it? It's like, well, either I get the job or you get the job.
Yeah, there's no third option, right? It's either.
And so I think that's, that's why we were all hoarding toilet paper when this lockdown started going out, because I'll be god darned if I'm going to be the one left without any toilet paper. So I think there's a human condition about a misunderstanding, a distrust of the other person over there. And unless you're in my tribe, if you're in my tribe, then we can support each other and help each other. So that's the next step of consciousness, of growth, and is thinking of the team and thinking of the nation state or the group or whatever your group is. And then the third step after that is to say, you know what, there's no tribe, there's no us and them. We've moved at least from me versus everyone else. We're now into us versus them, but wouldn't it be great if it was just us? So I think it's less about, now there are some culture, I think it's less about culture, more about the human condition. And that being said, there are some cultural environments where there's less of an interest in curiosity in that kind of unity. There's less of an interest there because here's another dynamic. Leadership both informs and is shaped by culture.
Yeah.
So leadership can influence the culture that we have, which is what I was talking about with Howard, who's had a material impact on the culture of the Scrum Alliance, both in its staff and its community. But then at the same time, the culture can beat down on positive leaders and can beat down on progressive leaders to where you end up just going with the flow. Because when you're leading against the flow, it can be exhausting and discouraging. And so, yes, and yes, I think there's something about the human condition that makes it difficult for us to appreciate people that are doing something differently than what we're doing. And there's something about culture that can reinforce whatever dynamic we have. Whether it's increasing the distance between people and teams or bringing down the distance between people and teams.
That's interesting, because just what flashed in my mind from what you said is, I wonder if I think back to the people that I thought were the best leaders, is that perhaps they were so good at changing the dynamic, me versus you versus you, to us versus this problem, this thing outside of us, right? And shifting the focus so that we're not all doing that and we're all together against that thing out there that we're fighting against, we're working towards replacing or whatever. I like it said that way, that they're good at, for me, that works, because I think that explains.
Yeah, and that's effective leadership, where you can influence a group of people to come together for a common cause. And with the case of the human condition and the human experience, is a lot of times the common cause is to unite against a competitor,
right? Or
to unite against a legacy thinking or legacy approach to things or legacy technology. So there's some adversary. There's one of my favorite authors is the author Stephen Pressfield, he wrote Bagger Vance. He also wrote a book called The War of Art. And in that book, The War of Art, he makes the point. He's like, without conflict, says the novelist, without conflict, there's no story.
There's no story. Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah.
So I think that's, and I would say arguably for the first bazillion years of human history, that was what effective leadership is about, rallying people against a common adversary. What we're realizing now in the last 50 years or so, that there's a postmodern conversation that's beginning to say, well, what if the next level or the next phase of humanity is, instead of saying it's rallying a group of people against another group of people, an adversary, what if it's rallying everyone against the concept of againstness? Like,
Wow.
what if
Mind
it's
blown.
what if it's rallying everybody towards the idea that, maybe it's not $15 an hour minimum wage. Maybe it's just everybody can just not be poor. How about that? Or instead of saying that it's either green jobs versus the carbon-based jobs. How about this? How about it's everybody has a job and everybody can breathe. So it's that and mindset. So it's about the journey, right? And right now, suddenly Jesse's starting to sound like a bunch of rainbows and unicorns, but
No.
but I think that's part of the leadership journey. Like how can I think progressively bigger? How can I think progressively more about more things? And it's not easy because we all have deadlines. We all have work to do. We all have, some of us actually have payroll to make. And so that can be a tricky business, I think. So that's why I think leadership stuff, that leadership journey really, really calls to me, because I think it's where some of that stuff can really be impactful.
Yeah. And the journey of leadership, sometimes, it doesn't really matter how much you've read or how many experiences you've had. Like you said earlier, is I've moved forward and now I'm facing a new barrier I've never faced before. And I am human and I get tired and I sometimes just need to be inspired by someone else. So speaking of inspiration, then who is your book targeted to? What audience would be most served by this book?
Well, one of the things that I believe strongly, and I found it over and over again, is that leadership is not a role. Leadership is a skill set available to any role. And so I had to kind of walk the Agile talk and design a product, the book, around 3 personas. And the 3 personas that we landed on was Ted, the team lead, who doesn't have a fancy title or any budget or any direct reports, but is an influential contributor that people look up to. A mentor, a senior technician of some kind. Maybe you're a tech lead, maybe you're a scrum master, or you're one of those project managers that has all the responsibility and none of the authority. You're Ted, the team lead. The other one is Maria, the manager. Maria, the manager, does have direct reports, does have some budget, and yet is still frustrated that things aren't going the way that we really want them to go. She's got like some really solid leadership skills, but doesn't view herself as the leadership, because in her mind, even though she's got direct reports and she's got budget and that she can wield influence, leadership is Emmett the executive. And Emmett the executive, he does have the fancy title. He does have the big budget, but is really frustrated that people aren't on board, engaged with his vision of where we're supposed to go. And so he's just like trying to wonder, and he's got some leadership skills that he brings to bear. And he tells stories just like Maria tells stories about how we can do lots of good process improvement. And Ted, the team lead, tells stories about the best practices. But they're all frustrated about the same things, which is I'm trying to drive better realities, better outcomes. I'm trying to make things better, but everything would be great if people would just listen to me, says every leader at every level, regardless of title. So those are the 3 personas that we track. So maybe you're a PMO manager or a PMO director like Maria, the manager. Maybe you're a deputy CTO like Emmett, the executive, or maybe you're just a senior engineer like Ted, the team lead. Either way, you have influence. And there are leadership skills that can help you make the right things happen.
That's very interesting. I would sometimes wonder, and I was talking to Cindy about this in the last, in our last podcast episode. I sometimes wonder, because things are labeled or books or publications or materials are labeled under project management, that leaders say, oh, I'm not a project manager. That's not for me. But you look at every organization has projects, and every executive at some point has participated in projects, but they just go, oh, I'm not a project manager. That's not for me. How do we fix that? How do we get that content out there?
Well, I think this is a good start. This is a good start. Let's just have, like getting people involved in a conversation to say that project management doesn't have to be the PMBOK guide.
Yeah.
Or the PMP. Project management doesn't have to be the clipboard police. Project management can just be get a bunch of people together and get something done.
Get something done. I knew you were going to say that, because that's exactly well said. Hey, Jesse, so what's coming up next for you? Now the book is out. What's next for Jesse?
Well, these days I'm really focused on raising the leadership IQ of professionals in any role and anywhere they're at. So I've been working on the Agile Leadership Journey curriculum and programs for leadership development, leadership awareness. So if you're interested in growing your leadership IQ in any role that you play, or you're interested in understanding what is an Agile perspective on leadership, then go check out agileleadershipjourney.com and start taking a look at how you can continue your leadership journey as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, Jesse, author of Untapped Agility, book is out right now, and I'll put the link to your book in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us, and stay in touch. I'd love to know what's happening with you, new cool things you do, or additional content like the website that you were talking about now. I'll get that link in the show notes. Thanks again, Jesse. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise. Always appreciate the chance to ramble. So
thank you for that. It was great journey. Thank you so much.